Welcome back to our friendly tech chat. And today we're talking about something very futuristic, very advanced.
Or at least they like to believe it is.
Now we will know the truth. The first impressions of web3.
Moxie is the guy who founded Signal. I think he's a cryptographer from by trade, and he's done other awesome stuff. And he has a blog, and I think last week, 2 weeks ago, he posted a blog about Web3, and I think it's a really solid analysis of what's going on in that space right now. And for those who don't know, Web3 is basically Web 1 was the 90s essentially, and then Web 2 was where you got progressive web apps and you got everything in your browser, and you got Facebook and Twitter, and believers in the power of blockchain essentially are saying that Web 3 is going to be that everything is built around these distributed data structures, so that you can have a distributed responsibility, the features and the applications that you have. So you still have the power of Web 2, but you don't have this single lock-in that platforms like Facebook and Google give, because the data is fundamentally distributed. So I think that's the story of Web 3 and the sales pitch. But then what Moxie did, he built two applications that are supposed to work this way, that use the blockchain as the data structure underneath it, that integrate with Ethereum, put them on the web, and did that to get a feeling for how Web3 works, essentially. And based on that, he wrote this analysis. One key thing that he highlights is that even though the data structures are distributed, the access towards those data structures still needs to go to clients that are built by someone and that are run by someone. And that means that in the space there is now actually 2 free players through which all access to these distributed data structures goes.
And I guess it's more like from practical point of view, because theoretically you can build your own access, but it's just not practical. That's
exactly
why you go via those sort of gateways. And
Yeah.
then those gateways become almost like a platform on their own.
Yeah. He at some point he's actually saying, and fun thing is, for all the extra features that these gateways have built on top, they're actually using just a MySQL database. So it's like, wait.
That reminds of an old saying: fighting monsters, beware becoming a monster. So we're fighting the platform.
Right, yeah, exactly.
And we're becoming even a worse platform, maybe. Or maybe better, who knows.
One of the reasons he thinks that this is happening, and he thinks this is actually natural that this is happening, is that it is hard to build and maintain and run these systems that grant access to the distributed data structures. And people don't want to run their own servers. Essentially, people don't want to run their own infrastructure, and I think that's very right. I mean, that's the whole point of the cloud, right? The cloud is just somebody else running your service for you.
It's not a big problem to run a server or a service. I mean, if it's just running, because it just runs under the hood. And now that we're talking, there are dozens of services running, and web services also on our laptops.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Hood. It's more about configuring and making them run in your way.
Exactly.
Because if you don't do that, then you're just following someone else's platform, and you're becoming part of that platform.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So that combination of control versus, I guess, quality, that is the hard part. So you can either give control away and get quality, but then you also give control away, and then what's the point of running it yourself? So if you want that high quality and control, then you need to put in a lot of effort and time.
We're talking about the original web. It was more or less distributed and free the first version, right? So it was not that problematic from this point
It's
of view.
basically just protocols for people who run their own server, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the
And there
the first
many
web,
would run
essentially.
their own services,
Yes.
servers, and
Yeah.
it kind of worked, but then it mostly collapsed. And the reason for the collapse was that. Well, what was the reason for the collapse of the first?
I think it's just the scale.
Mm-hmm.
At the scale that internet exists now, you can have some influencer, someone tweet a link, and you get 50 million visits in an hour, and the server you run just can't handle that.
Or if it does, then you get at the end of the month such a bill that you're not happy it handled it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so scale. Was it functional also?
Well, I think the two are coupled, right? The fact that web got richer is why people start engaging more with the web. So you get more functions, so you get more scale, so you get more budget to do more functions if you have a business set. So I guess that's a flywheel of use that has been running on overdrive on the web.
Another point which was also highlighted in the blog post is that the platforms are much faster evolved than standards, because if you have independent small players, then they need to adhere to some kind of standards to work efficiently with each other. That means the standard becomes your bottleneck, whereas platform, arrogant as they are, they don't care about standards or anything. They just move. Well, for most of the time, they just push their agenda.
And these days, pretty much all new standards come from a platform implementing something and then pushing that out into open source, and people, okay, let's all do it this way because this is the best way we've seen so far. Like how HTTP2 came out of Speedy from Google and stuff like that.
Which is not necessarily always the worst thing, so...
No, it's a very natural thing because platforms move quicker than standards. What a standard at some point should do is choose the best experiments that was run and move in that direction. I mean, that's also what you see with programming languages, right? Like how Java is picking up fibers, or what's it called, microthreads these days, in a way that's different than other more experimental languages have done them.
How does a blockchain play here role with the web3? What is the promise? Is it just blockchain magic, blah blah blah, profit, or is
I think that's
something?
that's the fairy tale that's being sold, and I think it doesn't work that way. I think there's too little of a social engagement in that story. Blockchain is a technical solution for a people problem. Separate from a people solution, I don't see that work.
Cost of software development. One of the points here.
I think it's his final blowout point, right? Like his recommendations are, we should accept the premise that people will not run their own servers by designing systems that can distribute trust without having to distribute infrastructure. And the other one is, we should try to reduce the burden of building software.
Yeah, that's I think very much close to the overall topic of our channel, the burden of building the software. So are we talking here about building software in particular for this Web3 or in general?
I think in general. I think especially if you present something as Web3, you present this as the next solution to the internet, which is where 98%, well, let's say 60% of all software is being used. I mean, there's of course quite a lot of business logic running on site but okay, never mind. And I also wholeheartedly agree that as a industry, we suck at building software. There is some things that are decent, but there's very few software that's being built really well. Very little software that's being built really well. And I think that's a problem.
Isn't it built well enough?
I think it's built well enough for the builders. And not so much well enough for users. If that makes sense.
Are we talking about user experience here, or
I think it's both. I think it's user experience, I think it's quality, and I think it's operational excellence, as in reliability. I think all three of those we are not doing well enough. And another important pillar of that, though maybe it belongs with user experience, is inclusiveness. I think that's also something we're not doing well enough. And I think in most like engineering fields, they have much higher standards for this than we do in software engineering.
can you give an example of this to be a little bit more?
Last Sunday, I had to help my father configure his 2 new laptops. And for me, this is a trivial thing to do. But he is 66, but he's worked with computers almost his entire life. So he's not exactly digital native, but definitely more than 30 years of experience of actively working with computers. He even taught computer sciences at high school. He should be better than average. But something as simple as setting up linking like 2 different mail accounts and having a personal OneDrive and a professional OneDrive, he just couldn't figure that out, and he had 2 wildly different results on both two laptops because it was just too hard for him. And that's the same story as when I went to grandma of neighbors of my parents, who I was like the 5th person called in to look at her laptop. And for me it was trivial because I live and breathe in this software engineering world where I understand what the assumptions are that all software engineers put into the software they create. But the fact that I was the 5th person looking at that laptop, and I was the first one who could set it up in a way that she could work with it, that's such a weakness, and I really think that shouldn't be necessary. But maybe this is a bit of a sidetrack.
Yeah, that's definitely a sidetrack, but on the other hand, that's the most relevant to our discourse. So that's why I would like to dig it a little bit more, and maybe even in a separate episode we can refocus on this. Because to me, well, what the examples you give, they are very much relatable, and I myself, as a software professional, do get sometimes very hard troubles. Well, I think with any product you can have, but especially in Microsoft, you mentioned some Microsoft applications there. Sometimes
exactly.
with Microsoft Teams, for example, for me, it can be quite difficult in the organizations where it's used more than just for calls. Okay, calls I can handle, the rest is mystery for me, how it all works together, how to find things. Could we solve it? Why is this problem coming? Is it detachment? Okay, so you mentioned one aspect, it's inclusiveness, but this inclusiveness basically means to have more empathy for your end user, to understand it a little bit better, right?
Yeah, and I also mentioned how other industries have standards, because as you said, indeed, we build software well enough, but we build it well enough to make money. But that means that by nature we just address the 80%, and that means that there's a significant part of user group that is not be served, and we're saying as an industry that's totally fine, we just want to make money. Well, what we're actually doing is solving problems, and it's worthwhile to solve those problems for as many people as possible. I don't know, maybe we need some way to penalize exclusiveness. I don't know. Maybe this is a legislation thing.
Well, most probably at the end it should be a kind of a legislation like RTBF and things like that. Until you make a legislation, it's always nice to have. Yes, we would like to, but it's never on our priority.
Exactly.
And same with this inclusiveness, although that's of course not easy to do 100%. inclusive. At the end,
exactly.
you still have a tail where
Yes.
where
There will be a long tail that will need specialist support.
But I'm not sure that this is necessarily the point of Moxie in that case particular. So we deviated a little bit because their
That's
point
true.
was about actually the cost of building software. So we're
Yes,
saying here
and-
that we're building software not well
Too
enough,
cheaply.
not well
Yeah,
enough, but
exactly.
there we're saying
Yeah.
it's already quite a burden
Yeah,
to
but-
build
but
it
I-
this way even.
But I think the two problems are related, you know, because it's so expensive to build software, you build as little as possible. Like you start cutting corners as much as possible. So if you make it easier to develop software well, you also enable the industry to develop more inclusive software. But they're not directly linked. So the other one is indeed a different point. That's definitely true. So then, thank you everyone for watching. Leave a like and mostly a comment.
And especially a
'cause,
comment.
Yes, because we'd love to hear what you think of Moxie's take on Web3. We'd love to hear what you think of our take on the cost of software engineering and the relevance of inclusiveness. And if you have a solution for any of these problems, we'd love to hear that.
For sure. Solutions. We need solutions.
Bye-bye.
Bye.